Okay, today, this is Leonard Davis with the Newport Beach Historical Society. Today we're interviewing Walt Howald, who lives in Corona del Mar, which is part of Newport Beach. So Walt, how do you do?
How are you?
And I've not met you, so I really know very little about you, so you're going to have to tell me everything. And we'll start with, were you born in Newport or locally, or?
No, I was born in Valley Center, Kansas.
Okay.
And my parents owned about 40 acres, and we had alfalfa and wheat, which is typical for that part of Kansas.
So what brought you? Did a tornado bring you here, or how'd you get here?
There were tornadoes, and I was hunting bullfrogs one time down in the riverbed, and a tornado came within probably 200 yards of my house, and I watched that, and so I learned about tornadoes.
Did it carry you to California, is what I'm asking.
Yeah. But actually, coming over here, I was 10 or 11 years old, and when we first came here, my dad and my mother had been a part-time wing walker in Kansas. And I don't know if you know what that is, but the airplanes used to have wings, and so she would go out there. That was a joke for you. My dad was built some of his local airplanes out of plywood back in those days, and so he was civilian draftee for Douglas Aircraft, and oversaw during the war from about 38 to 45, oversaw construction of the DC-3 and the implementation of the Norton bomb site in Tulsa,
So he
Oklahoma.
came out to work for Douglas then?
Pardon? No, he didn't.
Oh.
After the war, there weren't too many jobs available, and he and his good friend, Vern Watson, who was, they were both in Wichita and had been in each other's weddings and so forth. And Vern came out here to become an assistant postmaster at a little post office known as Corona del Mar. And my mom and dad came out and visited the Watsons, and somewhere along in there, I had gotten some pneumonia and had some asthma, and a doctor in Kansas said, well, it was a good thing to come to the West Coast because the weather was a lot better for that kind of problem. So Vern asked Dad if he would like to come out and be assistant postmaster. Mr. King was a postmaster at that time at Corona del Mar Post Office, which, by the way, was located over on Pacific Coast Highway, in between Coast Supermarket and Bouchard's drugstore on the corner of Marguerite and Coast Highway. A small post office. Mr. King was about ready to retire, and Vern had told my dad that if he retired, then Vern would probably become postmaster, which happened, and my dad would become assistant postmaster, and then they went through the whole process, and eventually my dad became postmaster at the Corona del Mar post office.
Okay.
My mom and I actually.
What year did you guys move to
My mom and I actually came out here in 1950. My dad had come out in 48 or 49 and rented a room from Mr. Hillman, who was over at 304, maybe it's 313 Goldenrod, right next to the footbridge. And so then we came out and stayed with Mr. Hillman there, and for about a year, and then bought a place on Fernleaf at 210 Fernleaf that had 3 units on it. The idea was Mom was going to take care of the rentals and so forth, and that didn't work out over the long run. So about 2 years later, we moved over to 243 Heliotrope, where my parents and I basically grew up. So coming from Valley Center, Kansas to Newport Beach, even in 1950, was somewhat of a cultural shock.
Yeah.
and to say the least. Anyway, but beautiful area. All of the hills that you see behind here were vacant. Where the Boy Scout Jamboree eventually came over where Jamboree is now was all vacant land.
Did you happen to participate in that?
I
at all?
did.
Okay.
I went to the 1953 Boy Scout Jamboree. And it's funny because I run into several. I was in Troop 17, which is the local troop. I'd been in Boy Scouts in Kansas, and so I was in Troop 17 here, and I've run into 5 or 6 other guys that I didn't know when I went to the Jamboree, that had also now, that are still here local, that weren't part of my troop but had gone to that Jamboree. So
how old were you then? So.
I was just turned 14.
Okay. Okay, so.
And if you want to see a picture, my kids love them, and they just laugh all the time at it. So anyway.
So you went to school here. You probably went to Corona Del Mar Elementary, or did you go to?
No, I started out here at Newport Elementary over on the peninsula,
okay.
and took the bus over, and then they built Corona Del Mar, an elementary that's now all houses, and I went there briefly, and then up to Horace Ensign Intermediate School, and eventually to Newport Harbor High, and graduated from Harbor High.
What year was that? What's your graduating class?
Corona Del Mar was...
no, what was your graduating year in Newport Harbor?
1957.
Oh, okay. My sister went there about that time. If you ever knew Sharon Davis, but she was class of 56.
What was her last name?
Davis.
What was her first name?
Sharon.
But she was older.
She was class of 56. I know you don't always...
She was an older girl. I mean,
you probably... Yeah.
We don't speak to
just
older
asking.
girls.
I had a brother named Andy, and he went there like 58 or 59, somewhere around there. But anyway, I graduated 71 myself. But anyway, okay, so after high school, then you went to college or somewhere?
I did go to college, that's true. But there's a lot of stuff around here that I was some kind of a representative at Newport Harbor High, and I went out, and I wasn't very good, but I went out to various athletic teams and so forth at Harbor High, and kind of was socially involved, and we didn't have, my family was, my dad was a postal worker, so while they were active in the community, we didn't have a lot of money, so among other things we didn't have a television, and so I made sure I had at least a couple of friends who did have a television, so I could do the classwork and so forth and the homework that was assigned. So then I went, and then I worked at various jobs here in high school. Among other things, I was a commercial fisherman in summer of 57 and 58 and 59, and went out on a 36-foot boat that was owned by a guy whose name was Parker Pence. Sounds like a good novel, you know. And we fished albacore right outside of here, between here and Catalina, and then out to San Clemente, which were very plentiful at that time, and then sold into San Pedro, and then the Cannery restaurant used to be Starkist years ago, and sold there. Then I went to UCLA College, and I had 17 different jobs while I was in college, and paid for my way through there. My 7-year-old granddaughter said the other day that she'd heard the story about the 17 different jobs, and she asked me the question. She says, "Well, Grandpa, were you fired by all those jobs, through all those jobs?" I said, "No, Ann, I wasn't fired, but anyway, I learned through those all the things I didn't want to be, and I think that's one of the things that kids miss now, is those kinds of job experiences. I had to do it out of necessity, but at the time, it was a great variety. I worked down on the beach. I made snow cones initially on Big Corona, where there was down there. I guarded. I did any job I could get. I was a trash man for Newport Beach when they used to have to pick up the containers and throw them up. Yeah. And so I stayed in shape between that and fishing. And it was a great place for jobs. So, and everybody else, and especially here, all my friends were going to college, so that seemed like the thing I should try to do too. And I ended up getting some scholarship money at UCLA. And then
did you wait a few years before going to college, or did you go right in after high school?
I went right in after high school.
Okay.
And then at the end of college, I went, I graduated with a English and economics degree, and then I had determined I was going to go to law school, and I got a job before that traveling with a education professor who was traveling mostly in Russia and those areas, and with another guy and myself as his...
Back in the 50s or 60s, huh?
Well, yeah, in 58, 9, somewhere along that line.
Tough time to go to Russia.
Yeah, it was a great time. It was really interesting. And he was interested in purchasing on the black market Russian icons. And so, of course, Peter and Nicola and my other guy and myself were charged with doing anything illegal. I mean, we weren't charged, but we were had that kind of activity. And then, so then I went to law school. I went up to, I had before that time gone to Berkeley in the 60s, which was a very illuminating time for a year up there, and had some special scholarship up there. Came back, graduated from UCLA, went over to Europe for 3 months in Russia, and then went to UCLA Law School, which I graduated from in 1962. And then I got a Ford Foundation fellowship, and where I was assigned to by the Ford Foundation and paid and so forth to the California legislature, and my boss was a fellow named Jess Unruh, and so I worked basically, I worked for Jess, but I also worked on the education committee for a fellow named Gus Garrigus, and I had a subcommittee that included several people, including Willie Brown and some of the other somewhat notorious legislatures at the time, and traveled all over the state. And then I was employed for another year after that by the legislature, not by Ford, but by the legislature. And I drafted special education and education legislation for both the Assembly and the Senate. The parties were, the distribution between the parties was much more equal than it is now. And so as a consequence, it gave me a lot of experience with compromises and being able to see both sides. Then I went up to, I worked for a law firm in Fullerton after that, and the name of which was Lawner, Chafee, and Hanna, and who were, Mr. Hanna was a legislator, congressman at the time.
I remember him.
Yeah, and Walt Chafee, and they were very prominent people in Fullerton, and by that time I was married to my first wife, and it was a very, very interesting. Fullerton was a great town, by the way. It has a lot of culture.
So you left Newport for all these things, obviously.
Yeah, my parents were still here.
Okay, so did your parents stay here for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, my parents were here from basically my dad from about 48 until he passed. And my mom was here until she passed when she was almost 96.
Okay.
So it's a long time in Coronado.
So how did you get back to Newport Beach?
Well, you know, you always have a question if you're, because Mom and Dad had done a lot of things in this community by that time, and you know, I basically was a trial attorney and commissioner and some other things here, and as an attorney, after I left Law and Chief in Hannah, I had a partnership with Bob Eadington, who was Eadington Fruit Company, which you may have heard of, at the time in Calavo, avocados, and so I did a lot of farm law and in that area. Then Bob and I moved our law practice to Santa Ana on Main Street, and then Bob got ill, and the partnership was dissolved, and then I came down and had an office on Dove, here close to Newport. By that time I had gone through a divorce, and eventually married and met my present wife, who you met, and we've been together 25 years, or 24 years.
So what year did you settle back in Newport with your law firm?
I mean, we're probably talking about at least 30 or 40 years ago.
Okay, so around 1980 or so. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to focus this on your involvement here in town. So, just going back though, when you were a kid, can you tell me one fun prank or incident of your youth that, you know, something involving Newport Harbor or whatever that would, you know, be interesting, or do you not want to admit to anything?
Well, when I came from Wichita, of course, there are two things that made it good.
Okay.
Two things that made it good here, and I was somewhat accepted because I had at 12 years old, 11 years old, I'd been driving for 2 years. Well, nobody here realized that driving on a Route 1 in Kansas was a little different than driving here. Although there were lots of lots in almost every block that were still sand in Coronado Mar. But so I brought my .22 and my BB gun, and I won't use his name, but well, Gary Crane and Artie Bircher and some of the other people, the local kids that were here, we'd go up and shoot the Irvine company's sheep and cattle up in the hills behind. Of course, we'd never killed anything because they weren't powerful enough to kill something like that, and most of the time we missed
with BB guns.
You know, and so we did some of that. Now, subsequently, I ran into Seymour Beek the other day, and I drove one of his ferries, and after several months or a couple of summers, as I recall, I ran into the peninsula side of the dock in I think it was the Ambassador, and I didn't do much damage, but Seymour told me the other day at that community thing that he would still, if I wanted to put in an application, he'd still hire me. I said, well, that's rewarding. And a lot of times I remember being upset with a classmate, and he and I got in a fight, and at the top, Bernie knows where this is, the top of Fernleaf Hill. And we rolled all the way down on the Bayside, and fortunately a couple of cars that were coming stopped. They didn't stop to break us up, they just stopped to watch. And it wasn't very serious, but anyway. So there were lots of things in college and so forth, as probably everybody has here. But this area, when I was growing up, was so somewhat sparsely populated. and a lot of the old timers were here. Mary Burton was here, of course, Bob Shelton down on Ocean Boulevard, and we're all neighbors. And it was truly a village where pretty much everybody knew. And when I eventually came down here and with 2 kids, my previous wife, we lived here, and part of the time we lived here in what used to be here, and then over on Goldenrod, another place that I own. And the kids would go down and Coast Super, and they didn't need money. They just took what they came for, and the people at Bouchard and drugs.
So you or your family's owned this property for a long time then?
I owned it, yeah.
Okay.
I bought it. I bought this, and I bought one over on Goldenrod and a couple of others. Goldenrod I bought from a fellow named Ira Smith, and who was a landowner here, and he gave me a very good price, and he said that I could have a loan for as long as I needed to pay it back. Boy, those were the days, you know. Yeah, my dad always complained because of the house on 243 Heliotrope. He thought he was really outrageous, 200 block in Heliotrope, because he paid $22,500 for that house. So it's silly how things have really
Wouldn't buy a doghouse now.
Yeah.
So your dad, tell me more about your dad. I mean, he was a postmaster.
He was postmaster.
And you said he was involved in the community. What did he do, civically or whatever that
Well, as postmaster, he was involved in Kiwanis, and he was involved in various what the Goof offers and Dick Richards and all the other kind of organizations that I'm sure Bernie knows, and one day his carriers would come back, and they'd say with several places that they would deliver mail, and he said that they didn't. The people never came to the door to get the mail, and so Dad wondered why, and so he went out and took some of the mail to this one place on Ocean Boulevard, and knocked on the door, and a voice said, "Just put it in the mailbox." And he says, "No, these are serious mail. I have to make sure I hand it to you." So this older lady came to the door, and he says, "We've never seen you all the years, we've never seen you." She says, "Well, I don't have any place to go. My kids live on the East Coast. They don't come and visit, and I don't know anybody now, and I don't have any place to go." Well, Dad took that bit of information and went back and talked to Dick Sweet and Norma Gilchrist and some of the other people there were 5 couples, and they started the Oasis Center up here.
and what year was that?
Pardon?
What year was that approximately?
Long time ago. The present Oasis Center has been there for 30 years.
Was this in the 60s or 70s?
It was probably 40 years ago.
Okay,
so
early
probably
80s.
in the 80s,
Okay.
something like that.
So your dad was still postmaster then?
Oh yeah. He
Okay.
was postmaster then.
Okay.
The Boy Scout Jamboree, which came along in '53,
Yeah.
and he was he got active in the host. You remember Virgil Parch, the cartoonist?
Yeah.
Okay, you probably do. Anyway, he
Members cartoons.
he got Virgil to do a big sign and so forth, and to greet other troops, and of course there were no roads over there where Jamboree is. There were cow paths and ranch roads. So he worked with Bill Spurgeon and Myford and other people, and when the Jamboree was over, there was one building that had come from Orange Coast College. That was an old Quonset hut that had come from the El Toro to Orange Coast College was used, but was starting to fall apart a little bit, and Orange Coast College gave it to the Jamboree to use. And by the time the Jamboree was over, nobody particularly wanted the building back. Dad had gone, and you may or may not know that Fifth Avenue was that runs in the back here, was a railroad easement, and nobody had used it for that purpose. There were a lot of other things that they were trying to bypass Corona del Mar, the one that went out in the ocean a mile and for a freeway, and all kinds of crazy ideas that most of the citizenry here stopped. And I was some involved in some of those later. But in '54, Dad was trying to get a partial up here to put a youth center, and would call it the Community Youth Center. And Irvine Company and the city of Newport, nobody would really give him a clear answer, oh yeah, okay, or whatever. So he was telling his friend Bill, who was a heavy equipment guy.
Bill Spurgeon?
No. This is Bill, a heavy equipment. He had a heavy equipment company here, but not Bill Spurgeon. But anyway, but he tried to work through Bill Spurgeon and Mason and all those guys that were in the Irvine Company. And so Dad's friend said, well, listen, I can solve that problem. Meet me up at the Quonset hut over on Jamboree, which was not called Jamboree at the time. But anyway, and we'll take care of it. So meet me at midnight. So he went over there at midnight, met him. They picked up the building, drove it over to where the youth center is now. No permits, no anything. Nobody woke up, nobody came out, They set it up on concrete block, put in water and electric to the building, and the next morning about 6 a.m., some people that were jogging or came back discovered there was a new building. They'd done the grading and so forth. And that became the Community Youth Center, which eventually became part of Grant Howald Park.
Okay.
So in all the tennis courts, and there was a Boy Scout and
how do you spell Grant Held? I just want to make sure.
Grant?
Grant and then Held?
Grant.
Yeah.
And then Howald.
Grant Howald Park. Oh. So your dad's name was Grant Howald.
The park's name is Grant Howald.
Okay. All right.
Named after Dad.
Okay.
And of course, as a kid, the windows would get knocked out, and I went over and fixed windows and had to go up and work, and I hated it. But anyway, and do all those kinds of things around, because my folks were very active in this community and were responsible for any number of things, including with other people whose names are all on the rock over at Inspiration Point, where they went to a fellow named Royal Radke, who was the manager of Bank of America on Marguerite and PCH. And I don't know, Bernie, did you know Royal? Okay. And because that property, all the way into Big Corona, came up for sale. And so the families that are on the rock, on that bronze block over there, all put together and signed on a loan through Royal, and they had 2 years in order to pay the loan back. And so they sold square inches of the property off and paid it back, I understand, in a year, and then dedicated it to the city. Those are things you could do in early Corona del Mar, Newport Beach. Didn't have to get, people just didn't get a lot of approval at that time for some of those things.
Did it?
But it was a really community effort. And that's what I always liked. Coming back to Corona del Mar, which is kind of your earlier question, coming back to Corona del Mar, you had a choice. You could move back in where your dad was quasi-famous, if not famous, and my mom was too. My mom was very active in all kinds of things. And whether you want to come back in that shadow or you want to do, and it was just too wonderful of a place to come back, and I love this city today, but to not come back to and raise your kids and so forth. And my daughter went to Harbor High, and my son, after it opened, went to Corona del Mar, and so we've got a lot of those connections.
Yeah, ties to both schools. Any rivalry going on between the two in the family then?
Well, I'm an attorney by profession, and my daughter is an attorney, and my son's an attorney, and my daughter married an attorney. So at Christmas Eve, from just kids and stepkids, we've got about 7 attorneys. And you don't want to, if you're invited to Christmas Eve, don't come. Unless you're prepared to argue.
Might get sued.
If you're prepared to argue.
So tell me about the Oasis. So you were involved in getting that started then,
No, I was not in getting it started.
But your dad was.
My dad and mom both were.
Okay.
And there were 5 families that were the founding families, and they started it. And then eventually there was a school located where the Oasis is now, right in the corner of Marguerite and 5th. And the volunteers tried to run programs and do other things there. But that's really hard to do, a volunteer program on a regular basis and provide all that. So Dad and Mom and others got the city involved, and eventually the city bought that property. And so the city owns the property, and then an organization called the Friends of Oasis was an organization that Dad was the first president of, and they provide, and still do, provide the support group, raising both money and overseeing what kind of programs are provided, what kind of events occur, and so forth at Oasis. And I've been on that board. You're elected every 3 or 4 years, and I've been on that board probably 16, 20 years, something like that. When I came down here with my practice, one of my friends over at Orange Coast College, I was always interested in education. Over at Orange Coast College, decided that he wanted me to run for an office against, he was a teacher there, against a fellow that was here that had some difficulties keeping his reimbursement requests from various organizations that he was a part of. So anyway, I ran against him and won, and then served as trustee on the Coast Community College District for 30 years.
So this is the Coast Community College District Board?
Right, which includes Orange Coast, Coastline, KOCE, and Golden West. And we had somewhere between 320 and 420,000 students, including the online students.
And how many years were you on that board?
30 years.
30 years. And so when did you retire? You retired from that? Are you still on?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know, 2008?
Okay, so
something like that. There was also another group called, that I was a founder on with a lady here, lived here, Jean Watt, and Fern Perkle, and some other people, and we were the Friends of Newport Coast. And we filed a lawsuit against the Irvine Company together jointly with, what's the name of the Laguna group?
The Greenbelt?
The Greenbelt, yes, the Greenbelt. And eventually, I think we won, and reached a compromise with the Irvine Company. And what came out of that, which I was involved with, was what is now called Crystal Cove State Park. We were within maybe a couple of boats of having it be a federal park, but I think probably looking back, it's just as well as a state park.
And I remember you could drive up the Coast Highway and look up the hills and just see cattle roaming around and nothing else.
Yeah, you used to be able to do that and go down to Crystal Cove where all the houses were, and now you rent them out and so forth, and it's pretty impressive. What they have now there. In my community college days, one of the more recent things is I'm the treasurer and one of the founding members of a group called Friends of Newport Beach Animal Shelter, and that we call Fawn Boss, and we've raised well over $2 million at this point. Bought a piece of property up on Riverside, and are getting ready to start construction of a new animal shelter, which we'll then give to Newport Beach, so they'll have a no euthanasia type of animal shelter here for Newport Beach. We have about 500 animals that go through the animal shelter. They're on lease property now, a year, and so adoptions, fine, and we provide from our funds. We provide for a lot of dental care because people can't afford to pay for dental care for their animals, and then we get a lot of animals through the fire department and the police department because people pass away or they go to jail or whatever, and they end up with a stray animal, and we take them in and go from there. And then there's animals that are hit by cars and other kinds of things that we fix them up. And then while I was on the Coast Community College District as a trustee, I was elected as a trustee on the California Association of Community Colleges, on a board that was some 20 guys, and was chair of that board for a while, and then eventually went to the National AACA, I think it is, Association, and interestingly was the chair of the Diversity Committee. Now this is some years ago, and diversity is not the subject then that it is now, and although I had support of a lot of African American and minority people, because my experiences back in Kansas, and Kansas was a segregated state at the time that I was a kid, so I had a lot of experiences from Kansas relate to some of the things I've done subsequently. And then I've been a practicing attorney in Orange County. The Bar Association gave me a letter the other day. I've been a practicing trial attorney in Orange County for over 50 years. And I thought, geez. And during that point, I was a single dad and, all that kind of stuff.
During your time in the community college, what can you tell me a major accomplishment that you're proud of that era? While you're on that board.
Well, opening up access, developing more scholarships, Pell Grants, and other kinds of things, going to the legislature, the federal legislature to get more money, as well as the state lobbying activities and so forth. One of the things I'm really proud as another trustee, his name was Paul Berger at the time, and I, the teachers' unions and employee groups and the administration often are at odds, and they have a system for medical insurance and other things that basically benefit both. And so Paul and I negotiated that these two groups would get together, negotiate every year the rates and what kind of coverage they had, and that committee still exists and is still doing that, and because it benefits all of them. And I think that for me that's been a big benefit to see for employees. I was on the library board of trustees. some years ago, and served on that, and was one of the founding trustees that supported and initially put together the Whitty series of lectures at the library, which is a great thing, and then expanded the children's section of the library, the main library, and as well as remodeled some other things over there. That was a terrific experience there.
This is the Newport Beach Public Library.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I went up to Kern County and to Bakersfield and ran and oversaw and passed their first school bond issue for their community colleges of $360 or $380 million, which for Kern County, as you know, is a very conservative area, and it was a difficult thing. Kevin McCarthy was up there at the time, and some of the other legislators that are very conservative, and my job was basically, among other things, to get people to not only donate to support the bond, but to get people out to, and they did, and they desperately needed it, because that area is a very, very diverse area. So I'm just looking at things, fundraising for the.
How did you get involved up there with going to Bakersfield all of a sudden?
I had met a couple of trustees from up there when I was on the California board, and they knew I was an attorney, and they asked me if I'd come up and do that. I did a similar bond out for College of the Desert out in Palm Desert. That was not quite as hard because the people out there were much more involved in their education thing. But I've been involved in educational things, and I have a strong belief that for me, I was the first person in my family to go to a college, and you know, all my kids have gone, and their kids will go, and I have, between my wife and I, we have 10 grandkids, and we're hoping to see them all graduate. One of them's right now just started the University of Paris, and another one's at the University of Edinburgh just starting. So it's
you're going to spread your family around the world. Huh?
well, yeah, and that's what education and our life has become, is so much more global. I like it right here in Corona del Mar myself, but.
So, back to home then. What do you do for enjoyment in town, and what are some things you really like about living here?
Well, the two things I don't like that have happened. One is traffic, and I guess you'd put parking with that, and the development that's gone on. You know, you can go down any block now in the Village area and probably see at least one and sometimes three construction project, all of which are going 2 or 3 stories high. No, you're right. You're right, and I'm guilty on that. But if we don't do something about the traffic and the parking, to develop every house as a 2-story, 3-story house, and we don't restrict the number of cars by permit or otherwise,
well, there's effort to develop things even more and have like R2 and R3 on every lot like this, and increase density. What do you think about that issue?
Yeah. What's that?
Well, you know, the plan SB9, which they want to, have people have granny flats and
SB9
apartments.
and SB10, sure.
And how are you feeling about that? Is that
not good?
Is it going too far? Or?
Oh yeah, no. That's a whole different reason. you know, I can't complain about somebody that buys a lot here and wants to take advantage of their location by building. And you're right, I'm guilty of that too. But at the same time, we have 2 cars, and we have 2.
So what do you enjoy about living in Corona Del Mar? I mean,
you know,
people
the best thing that both my wife and I have really enjoyed here is our neighborhood. This still, we retain a neighborhood sense, and basically know, at least in the village areas, we know everybody that lives around us. It gives us a chance to do some traveling, because this house was originally built with the idea that we would be able to close it up and go. And we've done that. 2 years ago we were in Africa, had a terrific trip for about 3 weeks, and have been a number of different places.
And is there anything in town you specifically like to do, like golfing or go to restaurants or
I love to go to
sailing or
restaurants, but
boating?
COVID has kind of keep us restricted.
Yeah.
And things that I love to go out to dinner. I love the fact that we have some great places. I like to take walks. You know, it's terrific.
Well, our time is unfortunately up, and we've got some competing noise over there. So, any last comments you'd like to say about Newport Beach or Corona Del Mar? Or
Well, Newport Beach is the greatest place to live. I'll always love Newport Beach. I still do, and I think it's just important that all of us, including your organization, recognize what we've had and what we can have as far as the future is concerned, by just controlling some of the things that we're trying to look to. I'm very involved in the Ocean Boulevard projects for preservation of Ocean Boulevard and making that more susceptible. People are surprised that the people, when we've taken interviews, they're surprised that the people that are walking on Ocean Boulevard, they don't come from other cities, they're us. And we need to take responsibility to do that.